Hello, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the first Environment and Community Scrutiny Committee of this political term. My name is Eva Divkovic. I'm the City Councillor for Arbury, and I'm the chair of this committee. I'd like to welcome you all to this committee, which will be taking place at 6:09. That's on the 29th of June, 2023. And can people please introduce themselves individually so we know who's here? Thank you. And we can start with Olaf, and then we'll go round to Sam and Alice Gilderdale.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Olaf Haug. I'm Ward Councillor for Trumpington.
My name is Ingrid Flaubert. I'm a City Councillor for Trumpington. I'm the alternative.
I'm Jean Glasberg. I'm the City Councillor for Newnham.
I'm Richard Swift. I'm a City Councillor for West Chesterton.
Hello, I'm Dinah Pounds. I'm City Councillor for Romsey.
Hello, I'm Rachel Wade, City Councillor for West Chesterton.
Hi, I'm Councillor Rosie Moore, representing Coleridge Ward, and I'm the Exec Councillor for Climate Action and Environment. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Sam Carling. I'm also representing West Chesterton. We've got the full set. And I'm also the Executive Councillor for Open Spaces and City Services.
Thanks. I'm Alice Gilderdale. I'm here from East Chesterton, and I'm Executive Councillor for Community Welfare Building and Community Safety.
Thank you. And as for the executives, we have 3 executives here today, and that's Councillor Moore, Councillor Carling, and Councillor Gilderdale, and I believe Councillor Healy will be joining us a little bit later. I'd also like to just welcome the people joining us online and the officers and also the public speakers. So on each agenda item, after hearing the deliberation of the Scrutiny Committee, it is a responsibility of the Executive Councillor to make the formal decision. The officers permanently at the table at this meeting are Andrew Lim, Assistant Chief Executive, Committee Manager James Goddard, and Producer Sarah Steed. Other officers and public speakers will join us throughout the course of the meeting, and I will introduce them at the start of the relevant agenda items. Now, I'm just going to go through some housekeeping, and I'll try and keep it quick because we've got quite a lot to get through tonight. So copies of the agenda can be found on the City Council's website under committee meetings, minutes and agendas. Please try and refer to specific page numbers within the agenda if you are referring to a specific paragraph or plan. Can I remind all those present of the importance of using microphones at all times when speaking? Please speak close to and clearly into the microphone. Please ensure that you've switched off or silenced any other devices you have so that they're not going to interrupt proceedings. And when you're invited to address the meeting, please make sure that your microphone is switched on. And when you finish addressing the meeting, please turn off your microphone immediately. Speak slowly and clearly. Please do not talk over or interrupt anyone. If anyone has any problems hearing me throughout the committee meeting, then please just alert me by waving your hand or just alerting one of the officers. And I just want to alert everyone that everything on your desk, including your laptop screen, is likely to be broadcast at some point. So once you switch on the microphone, the camera is on you. And please just raise your hand if you wish to speak. For those that are joining us via live stream, please can you indicate that you wish to speak via the chat column, raised or using the raised hand option. The chat is only used for this purpose, so please don't include anything else in the chat. This is so that the debate will run succinctly. Please do not use the chat column for anything else. And the meeting chat is neither confidential nor private, so it can be subject to a Freedom of Information request. And speakers turn off their cameras until you are asked to speak. And if an officer drops out of the committee due to poor broadband signal, the senior officer present will take over the presentation and respond to questions. Now, the process for each agenda item will be the relevant officer will give a brief introduction to his or her report. The Scrutiny Committee will then discuss the item, and then you may ask questions to the officer or to the relevant Executive Councillor for clarification. At the end of the deliberation, I will ask the committee to vote by a show of hands, and that would be on the officer's recommendation after we hear the officer's recommendations. In the event of a tied vote, I will give the casting vote, and then at this stage, the Executive Councillor will be asked to make his or her decision, which may or may not be the same as the committee decision. But this is rare, I've heard, so. And only those present in the chamber can vote or propose second recommendations. For the comfort of councillors, officers, and the public, I can choose when to call a short break during the proceedings. If councillors or officers at any point want to indicate to me that they would like a break, just raise your hand and say, and I will halt proceedings for a short period. So let's move on to agenda item number 2. Please could councillors declare if they have any declarations of interests and also identify which application their declaration relates to. No? Okay, we'll move on to agenda item number 3. So agenda item number 3 is regarding the minutes of the 23rd of March 2023 and the 25th of May 2023 meeting, and that have been submitted to this meeting for approval. If there are any concerns, please could members raise them now, or otherwise they shall be approved as a correct record. Okay, they're approved as a correct record. Now we're moving on to agenda item number 4, which is the public questions. First, I'm going to go to the people that are asking questions in the public that are present in the room. Then we'll go to those that are online, and then we'll go to the statements which the officer will deal with. Now, public speakers have 3 minutes to speak, with an additional 2 minutes for follow-up questions. This is a budget. You don't need to use the whole 3 minutes, but you're welcome to, and also you're welcome to stay for the whole committee session if you wish to. If a person is not able to attend to ask a question, the officer may read it on their behalf, or a response will be sent after the meeting if we're not able to address the question in the meeting session. Public speakers are not entitled to address the committee at any other point during the meeting, and if a member of the public tried to speak at any other point that they're not permitted to, they'll be asked to stop by me. I would just like to note that our public speaking scheme provides that the chair or the executive can actually refuse to permit a question or statement if it's already been put to or made at another meeting of a council committee or other body. And I can also discourage any repetition or limit any rights of address if more than one member of the public wishes to make a similar point. As long as it's conducive to the debate or to the agenda item, then that's fine. Or if you wish to raise it during an actual agenda item, you're also welcome to. And so I'll go to the first public speaker, which is Mark Ashton. Please, can you speak?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for letting me address the committee. Before I start, I don't expect the Executive Councillor to give an answer tonight, because I don't think we should make policy on the hoof. So it's protecting the already protected open and green spaces. Following the recent survey of Cambridge residents, what matters most, the top 3 that came out were living and walking, cycling, the distance, amenities and services, 44%, open and green spaces, 39%, and a sense of community, 32%. And we'll use the residents' feedback to help shape future priorities. I've been a resident in Cambridge now for 52 years and a ward councillor for Cherry Hinton for 12 years. Cambridge is now going through an unprecedented growth that predicts over 45,000 homes, and pressure on keeping our council-owned open and green spaces is now vital. We're all fully aware of the policies we are promoting: climate change, biodiversity, tree canopy. The recent pandemic only focused the need of those local spaces for our well-being, and this has now been well documented and measured. Open and green spaces are vital areas, not just to have a community garden, but to play football, cricket, walk the dogs, to play and to have community. I fully understand and recognise our need to provide more council homes, and I'm proud as a Labour councillor of what we have already achieved. However, this must not be at the expense of the above. So what action can we take and are taking to protect these valuable oases around our wards? Thank you.
Thank you. Would an executive like to respond? Thank you, Councillor Carling.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I was choking on some water. Right, thank you very much, Councillor Ashton, for bringing in the question. I'm very grateful, as always, for sort of the opportunity to go through in a public space like this how exactly we do protect our open spaces, which, of course, as you said, are so important to people's health and well-being. As the survey you quoted shows, it is incredibly important to residents. Before I start, I'll just say, as always, that I'm more than happy, of course, to liaise with you outside of the meeting as well, as you touched on. So, open spaces, regardless of ownership, make a significant contribution to the character of Cambridge. These areas are also valuable in terms of supporting a range of citywide strategies, such as supporting health and well-being, flood risk mitigation, and climate change strategies as well as being critical for residents, actually, they're a really crucial part of our infrastructure, as we all know. The Cambridge Local Plan, which guides the consideration of planning applications and is the primary sort of way in which this is taken into account, certainly during the planning stage of things, includes an appropriate policy to ensure valuable open spaces are protected. And that approach is consistent with national planning policy, and it is very much fit for purpose. So that's policy 67, which is the protection of open space. And I'll just quote from that now. So policy 67 says, development proposals will not be permitted which would harm the character of or lead to the loss of open space or environmental and or recreational importance unless A, the open space can be satisfactorily replaced in terms of quality, quantity and access with an equal or better standard than that which is proposed to be lost, and B, the reprovision is located within a short walk, 400 metres of the original site. So in the case of school, college and university grounds, development may be permitted where it meets a demonstrable educational need and does not adversely affect playing fields or the formal sports provision on the site, though of course the specific site that I think we want to discuss tonight, this doesn't necessarily fall into that category. And the policy goes on to say that where replacement open space is to be provided in an alternative location, the replacement site or facility must be fully available for use before the area of open space to be lost can be redeveloped. I think that's actually a really important point. So even sort of during the development stage of something, it's always that the replacement open space is created first before any is lost. So there's a clear presumption against the loss of open space of environmental or recreational importance. However, there may be circumstances where development proposals can enhance the character, use and visual amenity of open space and provide ancillary recreational facilities, such as kind of changing facilities, or materially improve the recreational or biodiversity value of the site. The policy goes on a little bit more than that, but I think that gets to the gist of it, really. And I hope that's reassuring. And again, I'm more than happy to liaise outside of the meeting. And this kind of also strays into Councillor Thornborough's territory as the Executive Councillor with responsibility for planning policy, so I'm sure she'd also be happy to engage. Okay?
Thank you, Mark. Would you like to ask a follow-up question?
I think I will do. The question posed was, we've already protected some of these open spaces. So we have open spaces and protected open spaces. So the question is, we protected them for a very good reason. So if they were protected for a very good reason, we should keep them protected. It's not just an open space, it's a protected open space. So I heard all what you said about policy 67 and the rest of them, but we all know what happens in various planning committees where common sense and people think that can't happen, it gets overruled. So my question says, as I said before, I don't expect an answer of the policies we're going to do, but I'd like consideration placed to say, how do we ensure our protected open spaces are protected?
Would you like to make any further comments?
Yeah, I mean, just to clarify, the policy I was just going through there does refer, it is about protected open spaces. And as you say, open space is protected for a reason, absolutely. People really rely on these areas. It's for residential amenity, it's for people's health and well-being, for all sorts of reasons, as I've said before, and the infrastructural aspect of it as well. So just to say that we do take it incredibly seriously, and for anything to happen on an open space, again, it has to be replaced. It has to, that's not an option. And there has to be very strong reasons for it to happen at all. That's all I would say. And again, I will happily have further conversations outside of the meeting.
Great, thank you for your contribution today. Right, so we're going to move to public questions online because there doesn't seem to be any other public speakers in the room. Bear with me a moment. Thank you. Could Dougal Ritson, is it? It says the name.
Hi, yeah,
Yeah, could you
Dougal.
please speak?
Yeah, sure. Hi, my name's Dr. Dougal Ritson. I'm a resident on St Thomas's Square. I've been for the last 12 years. I'd like to discuss or talk about the council's process and fact-finding for the proposed development on St Thomas's Park. So in September 2021, Ben Binns made a recommendation to the Housing Scrutiny Committee here after HSC that the St Thomas's Play Park be developed for housing. And we just heard Councillor Carlin stating how important green spaces are, and he said actually last week in the Cambridge Independent, as a council we take our green spaces very seriously and we care very much about making sure that all residents have high quality green spaces nearby. Given the council's strong position and in fact legal duty to preserve open green spaces, in this case an established open green space was actually in place before the surrounding housing was built, there must have been an extremely compelling justification supported by very robust evidence to recommend development. Now, if I read from the report made to the HSC in September 2021, page 294, Executive Summary 1.3, evidence gathered at an ASB, that's antisocial behaviour, ASB consultation in 2019 and reports made more recently suggest that the play park in its current form is underused and subject to vandalism. The suggestion of regular ASB incidents is made several times throughout the text and actually appears to be the main justification given for moving forward with the project. There are numerous examples, but just under one, section 10, page 322, high incidence of antisocial behaviour. So we requested to see the 2019 ASB consultation report on numerous occasions, but were fobbed off each time. Ultimately, we had to resort to a Freedom of Information Act to obtain the report. So the principles of openness, accessibility, inclusiveness, transparency and accountability clearly being followed. You can read it for yourself because you should have received a copy. We forwarded it to you by email, the copy of the ASB report, the apparent 2019 consultation, as well as a copy of the environmental audit. So I'll come back to that in a moment. Councillor Carlin, I think you've seen this before, but for those who haven't, here's a timeline. This is a report that comes from the council's own head of the ASB team. It actually starts 2012, but there are no entries until 2019. March 2019, complaints of rowdy behaviour, including fire being started and a house being egged. May 2019, ongoing problems of ASB. May 2019, a housing officer meets with a councillor and 4 residents. The idea of removing the space completely as it's not used for purpose is brought up. The development of the park is suggested. June 2019, environmental audit performed by the police community safety officer. August 2019, no recent reports of ASB. November 2020, case closed due to no report of ASB since 2019, presumably May. Remember, Ben Binns wrote his recommendations in 2021. So it would appear that the 2019 ASB consultation, which provided evidence that the park was underused and subject to vandalism, was in fact one housing officer, one councillor meeting with 4 residents who presumably were irate about a spate of ASB incidents. Hardly an elected and representative cross-section of the residents of the area. And lastly, I would draw your attention to the environmental agency survey conducted by the police community safety officer, so it thus being independent from the residents and the council. The full report's been emailed to you, but I draw your attention to the summary, and I quote, from 9th June 2018 to 10th June 2019, Cambridge Police received 1 call for St Thomas's Play Park due to rowdy nuisance caused by youngsters climbing on the garage blocks. Due to the very low reporting of incidents and the well-maintained play park, there are only a few recommendations which are mainly routine maintenance. Please contrast this with high incidence of antisocial behaviour and subject to vandalism. I mean, this has to be wrong. This is crazy. I mean, please tell me that there's a stack of evidence that supports the claims of the parks being underused and subject to a high incidence of antisocial behaviour. Thank you.
Thank you for your contribution. I believe this question may have already been raised at the Housing Scrutiny Committee, but I would like to invite Councillor Carling to comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, we did have a chat about this last week, but obviously more than happy to have another chat now. So yes, good to see you again. It's the third time in 9 days that I've been engaging with your group, and it's, as I say, it's good to see you. So I'm afraid my response is going to be similar in parts to the response I gave last week, though I will try to focus a bit more on the specific query you raise where I can. I think in terms of sort of the evidential side of things, there are certainly things we can look at, and I can go away and sort of clarify legal positions and such like, but as sort of the evidence from that Freedom of Information request only reached me about 10 p.m. last night, I haven't had time to make those inquiries in advance of the meeting today, I'm afraid, so I will have to follow up with you afterwards, but I will do that. So, as I said last time, I do think it's really important that we're able to have these discussions, and before I continue, let me just, again, stress that you don't need to wait for future council meetings. If you have questions or want to discuss things further with me, as I think we're going to do, my email address is on the council website, and of course, you've already been engaging with me outside of meetings for the last week or so. So just for the benefit of others, really, I'll just go through a little bit of what I said at Housing Scrutiny Committee. In the petition, there's a statement that there is a proposal to take away this protected play area. And the title of the petition, Save St Thomas's Play Park, suggests the same thing. So I'd just like to reassure everyone, as others have said initially, that it's not proposed to remove the play park. I know there's a little bit of disagreement about kind of play park versus play area, but what I'm saying there is kind of the fenced play area. So that's what I'm referring to. While the development would need the existing equipment there to be removed, it would be replaced with the same or better equipment. And I know there's been concern from the community about underinvestment in that play park. So this, would be a really good opportunity to bring in better equipment and hopefully solve some of the issues with the existing park. And I hope, regardless of what happens, that we can work together with the wider community to do that. And we absolutely will, of course. I'm absolutely committed to that. In the July 2022 consultation, a majority of residents felt that proposals would enhance the local area. However, there was concern about the scale of 11 houses on the site, so officers took that away and came back with a new proposal for 7 houses. I know you haven't seen those plans yet. They will be circulated this coming Tuesday at the consultation meeting, which I know residents are aware of, and indeed I think your group has been given a preview slot just before the main presentation to have a look at the plans. I will, of course, be happy to come down to the area again, as I did this weekend just gone, and we can map out where everything would go and sort of make sure it's all clear in everyone's heads to make sure that any residual confusion is dealt with. The new proposals keep about 69% of the green space on the site, so that's over 2,000 square metres, and they don't impact on the fenced play park, as I've said. The green space has been referred to as protected, which it is, and of course that was part of what I was speaking to Councillor Ashton about just now. We recognise how important green spaces are to people, and that's why, as well as retaining 69% of the space, the plans have provision to create some additional green space just over the road at the Eastern Garage site. That area has been referred to as a community garden, but of course really it would be whatever the community wanted it to be. So the document you circulated a few hours ago, that makes reference to justifications for the development, which you just touched on as well. But as I said, I got that at 10 o'clock last night, so I'm afraid I can't comment on it in detail, but I will respond to you after the meeting. Just to go through the process, after the consultation event next week, plans will be submitted as an application. The Council's planning team will treat them with the same rigour as any other application, as will the councillors on the planning committee. And I know that one of the issues that has been raised, and I do hear this, is in terms of having 2 separate open spaces doesn't necessarily replace functions that could only be carried out on a bigger space. I know ball games have been referred to in some detail. And I think if I come down and we all kind of plan out where things will go, we'll see if that is an issue, because of course, depending on where things are positioned, it may well not be. And hopefully that is the case, and then we can resolve at least that problem. And ideally, some of the others as well. Where was I? Yeah, so there'll be a formal consultation period after the application is submitted, where residents and any other interested parties can submit written comments in support of or in objection to the application, giving planning reasons. At the planning committee meeting itself, verbal presentations can also be made by anyone that's, Councillor Divkovic is trying to get me to stop, I think, by anyone that's submitted written comments. But yes, let me just finish really by saying that one of the things which I said on Saturday I'd go away and do is make sure that if a development does go ahead, that the replacement open space would come first. And indeed, having looked into the local plan, we can now confirm that's going to happen, again, if there's a development, because that local plan policy I quoted earlier says that where replacement open space is to be provided in an alternative location, the replacement site or facility must be fully available for use before the area of open space to be lost can be redeveloped. So I think that's everything I want to say at the moment, and I'm looking forward to continuing to engage with you.
Thank you. Dougal, would you like to have a follow-up question for 2 minutes?
Well, yeah, I've got about 25, I'd say. But first, I'd just like to thank Councillor Carlin for his willingness to come down here and talk to us and engage and take on board what the residents, really want to get out of this space, because that's what's been missing from the start, and what really aggravates us, that the sort of due diligence and the guiding principles of the council have been lacking from the start. But the point today is, what is the evidence for underuse of the park? From everyone we asked and all documents we had, there's none. And the justification of antisocial behaviour disorder is a spate in 2019, which is now non-existent. So there is no justification to change the space as it is, and it is protected. And this, dividing it up into two smaller pieces, that's a different thing. And there are problems with it. But we just want to know what the evidence is and what was accrued at the time when this decision was made. And that's it, really, I guess.
Okay, thank you. Would Councillor Carling like to give further comment?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, as I said, I know it's frustrating that I'm not directly answering that point that you're raising, and believe me, I'd love to answer it, but as I said, the evidence that you sent through to me came at 10 o'clock last night, and I can't have looked at it by then, I'm afraid. But I can confirm I will give you a full and detailed written response after the meeting, okay? And I will address those points, I promise.
That's good to hear. So you will get a response from Councillor Carling after the session. We have another question. It's from Pesticide Free Cambridge, but it's written. I don't know whether Councillor Carling would like to respond to it during the session or whether you'd like to give a written response. I know that the head of environmental services is going to be giving a written response after the committee. Would you like to?
I can certainly make some comments on the question, absolutely. Is it worth reading it? I know it's quite long.
It's available online for
Yeah,
people to read. I think that should be fine.
Yes, as it's quite lengthy, that might be best, otherwise we will be here a while. So yeah, I mean, I don't know if Ben and Julia will watch this committee back, but I'll write to them anyway with what I'm about to say, essentially. And, I'm really grateful to Ben and Julia for bringing these things forward again. I think when I first realised that Pesticide Free Cambridge is only ran kind of by two people, I was amazed because of all the phenomenal work that it does. I think it's incredible, and I really have a lot of respect for them. So I've had a meeting with Ben and Julia a while ago in which I said I'd follow up with a lot of these things, and I will be doing so. So, in terms of the first point they raise, which is regarding sort of a bit of confusion about the current herbicide reduction plan, I can say that in terms of the City Council's own estate, there's been no change to the decision that this Scrutiny Committee made on the 23rd of March, in accordance with officer recommendations then, and then what was reported in the corresponding press release on the 24th. That is as it was. So in other words, we are not using herbicide to treat vegetation growth on any of our City Council hard and soft surfaces, except for our local authority housing estate hard surfaces outside of the 4 approved herbicide-free trial ward areas, and those are Arbury, Newnham, West Chesterton and Trumpington, which I think is almost every council in the room, actually. Strangely enough, we're all here. So in terms of the county council's adopted public highway estate in the city, which we maintain on their behalf, we are continuing to assist them with implementing their recently adopted policy of moving from a county road network-wide chemical weed killing to priority-based weed removal by non-chemical means. That's quoted from the Highways and Transport Committee from the 7th of March this year. And that's then, of course, in accordance with the Scrutiny Committee's decision later on in that month. So to date, the County Council has not instructed us to apply herbicide on any of its highway verges in the city. Instead, we've been managing weeds in the adopted highway using non-chemical means, such as mechanical or hand removal. Now that we are several months into implementing this new approach, the county have asked us to assist with an evaluation of its effectiveness and whether or not there are any associated issues, including available resource and associated costs, risks to health and safety and such like, and the risk of physical damage to highway assets, such as streets with granite set or York paving, where the county may want to kind of consider specifying targeted and limited uses of herbicide, but we need to kind of properly review that and look into it. That was one of 6. My other responses will be shorter. So the second question was about what's happening with the herbicide reduction working group, which was established last year. And the question says that it was running regularly until the 9th of May, with a proposed follow-up meeting, which hasn't happened. It's not immediately clear why that hasn't happened. Of course, I've only taken on this portfolio just over a month ago. But I will, of course, follow that up, and I think we'll get a forward plan produced so that we have meetings booked in for pretty much the rest of the sort of civic year, and then we can make sure that we don't drop any off again, so sorry if that happened. The third point was about the city centre being an exclusion zone to the herbicide reduction plan. And I can share that concern. I think, if we want to make sure Cambridge is herbicide free, then we need to do it properly. And we can't be having kind of exclusion zones here, there and everywhere. But it's a really difficult issue is the problem. And it's being led by the County Council as it relates to the management of the County Council's adopted public highway assets within the city centre. So what we will do is ask the working group's lead officer to convene a meeting with county colleagues and yourselves as well, Pesticide Free Cambridge, to discuss where that evaluation work is at the moment and any resulting findings, and kind of basically we'll all get our heads together and work out what's happening there. The fourth point, let me see. Yeah, this was quite a broad scope question in terms of other action points. I think it's probably easier if I just give you a written update because there's a number of things there, but I will do that shortly after the meeting. Then there was a question about the draft communication plan for residents, and I've only taken on this portfolio last month, so I don't have the immediate answer, and the officer that I need to check with is on leave, but I will check and get back to you as soon as I can, okay?
Okay, thank you for everyone's contributions. That concludes agenda item number 4. We'll now move on to agenda item number 5, which is the review of Public Spaces Protection Order for Dog Control. So we've got the presenting officer, Wendy Johnson, who's the Community Engagement and Enforcement Manager. We don't have any public speakers. Please could Wendy introduce the item? Wendy, you're on mute. Okay, we'll change the order then. In that case, we will move on to... Yeah, Wendy, could you please log out and log back in and see if that works? Thank you. In that case, we'll now move on to agenda item number 6, which is the Cambridge City Heat Network Detailed Project Development. The presenting officer is Andrew Lim, who's the Assistant Chief Executive and is supported by Jeff Laidler. Please could the officer introduce this item?
Thank you, Chair. I'll be brief. Jeff Laidler, who has gallantly joined us from a cafe somewhere in Peterborough, I think, and can take any technical questions if there are any that I can't deal with, whilst he should be at an awards evening where he's up for an award this evening. So thank you, Jeff. So Jeff is the consultant who's supporting us on the project management of this project. Hopefully, some of you would have attended the briefing that Jeff provided for members a week or two ago. So where we are is the District Heat Network, which is an attempt to provide renewable heat and water to buildings in the city centre in the first instance, has been going through a feasibility study, which the council has co-match funded to the tune of something like £16,500 so far, alongside the University of Cambridge, who we're very pleased to be working in partnership with. And we secured through that match funding something getting on for £100,000 with government funding, so we've been able to commission some expert engineers to carry out a feasibility study. That's still going on. The committee cycle doesn't quite allow us to kind of wait for that to finish before we come back to you, but basically the initial findings are looking very positive in terms of kind of an overview of technical and operational feasibility for the heat network. So we'd like to go to the next stage of more detailed project development, which is in the kind of the sequence of stages you go through with one of these kind of things. So we would need to apply for further government funding of some hundreds of thousands of pounds. And in order to leverage that, we need to be willing to make a contribution of our own funding and also the university to be willing to kind of continue to work with us on that. So the point of this item this evening is to ask for, in principle, support for releasing £180,000 of the Council's Climate Change Fund, so that, subject to certain criteria being met as outlined in the report, we would make a bid to the government this summer for this next stage of funding that then will enable us to kind of procure more expert advice to go into the next detailed level of project development. So we're not making a decision now, should we build the thing or should we finance it or whatever. We're simply asking for a bit more money to kind of do the next detailed level of study and investigation that would go further into looking at the kind of the technical and operational kind of issues around this. We would also start to kind of bring forward proposals around how you could finance it and how you could manage it in due course. And then after that, the council will have decisions to make about the role it wants to play, how much it wants to. So I hope that's reasonably clear as to what we're aiming to do at the moment. As I say, it's as I've said to people in the briefing and also outside, it is a potentially hugely significant project for decarbonising the city centre. It is critical to our own climate change strategy and our targets to decarbonise our own buildings, including difficult to retrofit listed buildings like this one, Corn Exchange, Parkside Pools and so on, and others in the city centre, which similarly very historic, very significant, but need to be provided with renewable heat. So that's what the district heat network will do. You would also still continue to do retrofit kind of activities in the building to insulate, to make sure that the kind of renewable heat kind of was sufficient and effective. And Dave Princep is leading an asset management programme to kind of do that for the council's properties. But ultimately, if this does prove to be technically and financially feasible, and if it did happen, it would play a major part in decarbonising both those difficult council assets, but also other buildings across the city, and show real, I think, community leadership as the council's strategy aims to do. So I hope it's reasonably clear what we're trying to kind of do. The paper, we did ask Jeff to kind of really boil down the paper because there's a vast amount of technical work that's gone into it already. So I hope it's been helpful and clear, but obviously we'll do our best to field any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Andrew. We'll now move on to the debate. I want to remind members that if you would like to speak, just to indicate your wish to do so by raising your hand. I would like people to be succinct and to try to limit their questions to 2 to 3 questions, because we don't want lists of 7 questions. So if the officer needs to respond, they can be able to respond properly instead of being inundated with questions. And I would allow Councillor Olaf to speak.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, that obviously sounds like a great project, and I have 3 questions. I hope that's within the limits. Thank you. But that obviously sounds like a fantastic project. So actually, my first question then is, why this hasn't happened earlier? So considering that heat networks do already exist in other cities, so has Cambridge actually missed an opportunity there to be a real trailblazer and to be at the forefront of our fight against climate change, considering that the world looks at us as a world leader in innovation for so many other things. My second question is sort of what will be the scale of the expected disruptions to the city centre? I mean, some of them are described in the report. I realize that. I just wonder whether this could be elaborated a bit. So where are we between bringing the city centre to a complete standstill for a period of time? Or maybe can this even be done smoothly and nobody will actually notice? And I mean, personally, I think it's worth tolerating a short mess, for the long-lasting benefits. But I think this should be communicated well, of course. I mean, the public should be, and businesses should be prepared for that. And finally, I have read about some maintenance problems for existing heat networks. For example, with respect to water quality in the system, and also energy prices. If I'm correct there, energy prices for heat networks are currently unregulated. That means there is a risk that higher costs due to maintenance might be passed on to other residents or businesses at a later stage. So is this already sort of part of the plan to mitigate this in some way? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Would the executive like to respond, or would you like the officer to give a response?
I'm happy to respond, but I don't know if Jeff wants to respond as the expert, and then I'm happy to pick up on anything more political. Or Andrew, sorry. But I'm happy to answer anything.
Yep, Andrew, speak.
Thank you, Chair. I'll have a stab first, and then if I ask Jeff to come in on the technical questions after that, and then Councillor Moore will deal with the kind of political aspects, if that's okay. Why hasn't it happened earlier? Good question. We have been exploring district heat networks for some years. So soon after I arrived at the council 12 years ago, there was a project going on. We were looking at kind of, could you do something that would have tried to achieve similar benefits to this, but that was based on a gas-fired, CHP, combined heat and power unit. Clearly, you wouldn't want to be doing that now. So the technology is evolving all the time. And the financial situation is evolving all the time. Ultimately, that one was constrained by grid capacity connections, I believe, but also kind of, costs of works and so on. So it's something that we've revisited as opportunities have re-arisen, I would say. And the fact that the government, the Heat Network Delivery Unit exists now and is providing some funding for this makes it more feasible, viable for us to kind of put some effort in ourselves. And I think, again, the whole world around, and the world's understanding around climate change has changed. I think our current climate change strategy fundamentally flipped what the council was trying to do from previous strategies, which were very good, very well intentioned, but perhaps kind of focused on incremental kind of reductions. That this will now set the target. This was councillors' leadership to set a target of being net zero by 2030. That forces you into a different way of thinking. So that both we and the university, after they set their own science-based target, had a greater impetus perhaps to explore or revisit some ideas that had done previously and explore the feasibility. So I think we've tried to be in the forefront. I think Jeff advises us nowhere has done one like this, in a historic city centre in this way. They're more normally done in, brownfield or greenfield redevelopments. The idea of doing something in a city like this is innovative, and therefore it carries risk and challenge and so on. So I think we are sufficiently close to the bleeding edge would be my kind of perspective, but Councillor Moore may want to say more on that. Scale of disruption, I will hand over to Jeff, but I think the point is we don't know the detail yet because we haven't worked out exactly what we're going to do, how, where and when. But I think our starting point would be, as a point of principle, you would try and do soft dig rather than hard dig because it's easier and cheaper and so on. You would absolutely plan and work with the highways authorities to minimise disruption and so on. There would be some disruption, of course. And I think everyone in this room understands that with a climate emergency, you have to make some difficult decisions. You have to make some choices that you wouldn't want to do, but if you don't, you're not going to address the kind of scale of the problem we face. So Jeff has more experience of this than me, so he can kind of perhaps expand on that, but I think the principle would be you would absolutely try and plan and sequence and minimise, and you would kind of try and work with other people, utilities providers, highways, and people who are kind of doing similar work to try and minimise it, but you can't pretend there wouldn't be disruption. So your point about communication and engagement with people in the area and users of spaces and connectivity and so on, you would have to kind of engage with very thoroughly to help them understand that this what you were doing and why, rather than just kind of announcing the roads are closed tomorrow for 6 years, which I hope very much wouldn't be the case. Forgive my flippancy. Maintenance and problems with other courses. Again, I'll hand over to Jeff if that's okay. So thank you, Jeff, for joining us. Through you, Chair.
Okay,
So-
thank you.
Oh,
sorry.
Thank you, Jeff. Yeah, you can answer all the technical questions here.
I'll have a go. So scale of disruption, yeah, I mean, that's a key consideration. And I mean, stakeholder engagement is something that we've taken very seriously, and we're sort of expanding that for each stage. So we've got some senior commitment, political commitment, talking to within the university and now the colleges as well to get that senior engagement. And as the project develops, as we develop the business case, we engaged more and more stakeholders. And obviously, I mean, it's a long lead-in period for a project like this, but certainly disruption is something that is right up there in terms of minimising it for businesses, university, colleges, council, etc., and the public. So that's something we'll develop iteratively as we work our way through the process. Water quality, that's something we can definitely require in terms of the specification. It'll be a standard sort of requirement to make sure that it's got the highest levels of water quality. Energy prices, well, regulation is coming. So a heat network is it's a monopoly provider. So energy prices are going to be key. And regulation is scheduled to come through to protect the consumers by 2025. So we wouldn't be looking to build before then. So actually there'll be full regulation to protect the energy prices. And I think within that, obviously the council, university, etc., are key anchor heat loads. So we'd be looking for getting the best deal for the council in terms of its energy prices and all the other customers, commercial primarily to start with. So at the moment, the financial case is looking really positive. I think the opportunity then is to then apply for grants, which are available. There's significant funding available through government grants to help then reduce the actual tariffs for the end users. So that's definitely a sort of key part of the business case.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. And Councillor Rosie, would you like to give comment?
I think that they've covered it very well, and I'm happy to wait and see what the other questions are. Thank you for your answers.
Hopefully that answers your question, Olaf, or questions. Okay, anyone else would like to ask a question? Thank you.
Yes, I'd just like to say that this is a really welcome and very exciting initiative, and Cambridge is exactly the right kind of place that should be leading on this and working for a cleaner, greener, safer world. And it's particularly welcome in the light of our Tory government's complete failure to invest in green technology and support such initiatives. I just wondered if you can say any more, and it may be that you don't have the detail yet, but how you envisage a financial return on the council's investment, which would then enable sustainable public income for future investment. Thank you.
Through you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Pam. That's a question beyond my kind of technical expertise. Jeff may be able to kind of give an indication. I think the point is there's a lot of options at the moment about how you finance it and whether the council gets involved and whether it kind of seeks to be a kind of lead developer and kind of manager of the scheme and generate an income for itself. It could do that. Obviously, with all the things of this scale, there's a risk-reward kind of decision that we'd have to kind of, come to at some point downstream as to kind of whether we want to get into it or not. And you'll forgive me for being reasonably kind of bureaucratic and cautious about these kind of things, and I look at other councils that have tried to do kind of, energy schemes and found themselves in difficulty. But at the same point, there is a long, proud tradition of municipal energy in this country and elsewhere, and if it's possible and viable and kind of looks like giving a kind of, reasonably secure kind of return, then I'm sure the council will want to consider that seriously. But Jeff, do you want to kind of explain a bit more about how it works?
Yeah.
Jeff,
So, sorry. Yes, thank you, Chair. So, I mean, the local authority already, the City Council, is showing its enabling role as bringing this project together. So, as planning authority, as significant landlord and sustainability leader, it's got a key role to play in terms of facilitating the project. The next stage of detailed project development, that's when we'll look at the sort of the 5 elements of a HM Treasury business case following sort of Green Book guidance. We're going to prioritise the funding and the management, the finance and the governance that form part of that business case, because that will then inform who's going to ultimately own it and invest in it. So the good news is from the model that's come through at the moment, we've got the full range of funding options. We could ask the private sector to do it. We might want to do it in partnership with the private sector. We might want to do it ourselves, whether that's the council, the university and or colleges, any combination of those. So we've got the full range of options to consider, which we'll then look at the next stage. And I guess the council has got that enabling role. It's got the opportunity to be a customer, and then it's also got the opportunity to go one step further and consider any sort of investment and ownership. But that's all for the next stage of detailed project development.
Thank you, Jeff. Are there any other members that would like to ask a question? Yes, Rachel?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I know that one of the aims of the report is to promote community buy-in. And this is probably for you, Jeff, because going forward, I wonder how much opportunity will there be to connect to residential housing stock to help tackle climate change and obviously at the moment fuel poverty. I wonder if anybody, I know that's a pie in the sky at the moment type of question, but it's a serious one. Thank you.
Jeff, would you like to answer that question?
Yeah, so what we've tried to do is to strike a balance between sort of ambition and practical reality, with the city centre focusing on core buildings that we've got control of. There's definitely opportunity to expand the heat network. Heat networks work best at scale, and if you can actually bring in additional residential customers, it helps the network become more efficient. Just to caveat that, it's easier to connect blocks of housing, so rather than individual housing. So that's probably the most challenging. Private sector individual will be the hardest to connect, but certainly opportunities to look at the whole mix, and certainly the council's social housing stock, key opportunity to then decarbonise. But that's a step beyond sort of the initial sort of launch pad, which would be then the city centre heat network.
Okay, thank you. Would anyone else like to make a question? Yes, Councillor Gilsberg?
Yeah, I've got 3 questions, but they're quite short and connected. So the first one is a bit about the technical detail of it, because obviously this is going to have an impact on the appearance of these green spaces, where you're now proposing to put the boreholes. And I understand if you put too many boreholes on a site, there might be a danger that the ground might freeze, which wouldn't obviously be good for biodiversity or the attractive appearance of the site. And I just wonder what steps you might be taking to ensure that that wouldn't happen. And again, as regards the boreholes, I don't know if you've got any idea at the moment how deep they would actually be. And are you expecting that the site would have to have, and I mean, these sites could well have archaeological significance. And do you think that a desk assessment would be sufficient, or would there need to be a physical dig to take place? And this could obviously mean that the project would then take longer. And I just wonder if you've considered that. And then finally, on page 171, we've got Anthony French has said that he does see this as an opportunity to improve some of these spaces, because grass is obviously a monoculture and not particularly great for biodiversity. So this is an opportunity to improve the public realm. And I wonder if you're considering planting wildflower meadows there and looking at the biodiversity gain on top of the decarbonisation boost, without needing to change the spend on this. That's it.
Thank you. Jeff, would you like to comment?
Yeah, it's a really important point in terms of the open spaces. So there would definitely be disruption, but there's a chance to actually enhance those spaces. So once we've installed the boreholes, and you can reinstate it and actually improve the public realm. So we would obviously take views on that as to how that might be achieved, and biodiversity net gain would be something that certainly through planning we'd need to consider really sort of top high on that list. So there's a chance to improve the spaces. Once it's installed, you wouldn't actually know that it was there, and in some ways it also protects from future development. So that might be an added advantage on particular sites, depending where they were within the city. The physical dig, we will need to do a physical dig because we need to confirm exactly how much heat is there. Digging the boreholes is expensive, so we want to make sure that we don't do too many. So we're commissioning a small piece of work now to see what data we can extrapolate from existing schemes that are already operational at several other colleges in the city. So that'll help inform how many boreholes that we do need, but we'll need to do that later on to sort of de-risk the project. That's and sorry, in terms of the ground freezing, we'll obviously consider that as part of our strategy. Make sure that doesn't happen.
Yes, Andrew?
Thank you, Chair. I mean, just to say, I suppose all of those things about what you do with the space afterwards, I think would come downstream, but clearly we would take into account all of the council's existing policies and community engagement and kind of work out what you want to do with the space. I mean, for some more central spaces, you might just want to reinstate as they are because they're well used in the current form and so on. Others, as you say, you'd have the opportunity to think about kind of what you want back on top. The point that I think the public space manager kind of had made was about the topsoil being so compacted by years of being used and having stuff stood on it, that actually he was seeing the opportunity to really have a good dig was a very welcome thing from his point of view. Whatever you grow there, it will grow more healthily if you kind of change the soil a bit. So I think that's the point. Jeff probably has to go from the kind of Wi-Fi hotspot he's been lurking in. So thank you to the kind of managers of that place, whichever brand of cafe it may be. We can never guess. But anyway.
Thank you, Jeff, and thank you, Andrew. Does anyone have any further questions? Rosie?
Just if Jeff is leaving, can I just take this opportunity to thank Jeff and Andrew for all of their hard work on this project. I believe it's a really exciting project. Obviously, we are only at the beginning, but it really has an opportunity to help us achieve our carbon reduction targets as a council. But I don't know how we would if we don't. But also as a city, and to do it in partnership with the university to offer it to other city centre organisations and businesses. But then, as Rachel has said, Councillor Wade has said, to have the opportunity, hopefully in the future, to extend it to residential areas. Climate change, climate crisis is very depressing and scary, and so it's really good to have to feel that there's an actual project that we can really make a difference for Cambridge and do our bit globally. So thank you for your work on it.
Thank you. Are there any further questions, or should we draw this agenda to a close after the vote? Okay. Okay, we'll move on to the vote then. Please could the officer just repeat the recommendations?
If I may, Chair, perhaps
Just
just
before the
reference,
vote.
there's 3 of them on page
Just briefly.
151.
Yeah, as printed in the agenda pack on page 151, it's to approve in principle the allocation of £180,000 from the Climate Change Fund. That's the critical bit. There's some criteria we put in there, and there's then to delegate the final decision on that to the Assistant Chief Executive in consultation with the Executive Council and spokes. And then just to note the point I'm saying that there may well be a further decision required to support the technical assessment work, which include kind of borehole drilling and other things in due course. But we'll know more about that when we've done the kind of the study. But I didn't want to hide that from the committee or anybody else, that there may well be further costs as we get into it. Okay.
Thank you. So we'll now go to the vote. I'll ask each member in turn to confirm with, or just raise your hand to indicate whether you're in favour of the agenda item.
Yeah, yeah, that's unanimous
That's
in favour of
carried.
the recommendation, Chair.
Thank
The
you.
executive?
I accept the recommendations. I'm very happy to. It's a really excellent project. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. So now that's carried, and we'll go back to the PSPO agenda item, which is agenda item number 5. And I believe Wendy's available. Yes, Wendy, could you please introduce the agenda?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Apologies for the previous IT issues which happened at the most inconvenient time. So I'm bringing to the committee a paper to set out the extension and variation of the PSPO for dog control. The paper presented is the final recommendations for endorsement to the committee following the statutory consultation that took place during February and March. So just to go through a few key points of the paper. So the existing dog PSPO expires in October 2020, and if the PSPO is not extended past that, then at that point there will be no dog offences in Cambridge, which in layman's terms would basically mean that there would not be a requirement to pick up after your dog. So the PSPO is not designed to restrict the exercising of dogs, but to address the irresponsible behaviour of the few minority, and it is a minority that we're talking about, and to set a clear standard of behaviour that we ask that dog owners adhere to. So by law, to vary or extend a PSPO, the council has to consult with the Chief of Police, Police and Crime Commissioner, County Council and appropriate community representatives. And as part of the consultation, the full consultees are in Appendix D. So in January, we sought to bring about a number of amendments and variations to the current PSPO. And following the consultation, we have made some amendments to the proposals we're seeking to take forward, namely that the dogs on leads areas should remain as they are, with the caveat that Hanover and Princess Court should only exist as the development is now. Once that site is redeveloped, then that restriction should cease to basically cease and should no longer apply until after redevelopment, after which time it was subject to analysis of any problems and future recommendations. A proposal was made for Coldham's Common to be a dogs on leads area at all times. Officers are not recommending that this goes forward following it not being clear to be able to identify when the sports pitches were actually in use or not in use. The dogs on leads restriction was made as a new proposal to protect nesting birds between March and July each year. a number of nature reserves, Mill Road Cemetery and Hobson's Park. Officers are recommending that all of those go forward with the exception of Hobson's Park due to the South Station compound. We feel at the current time it's not appropriate to introduce that, but rather to monitor over the next 3 years as to whether that's appropriate to look at in 2026. The dog exclusion area, the proposal was to retain all of the existing areas and a new area to be looked at for Coldham's Common multi-use games area and AstroTurf pitches and Shelley Row Recreation Ground. Officers are proposing those new areas are created at Coldham's Common and Shelley Row. Hampton Gardens was also looked at as to whether the area should be extended. Officers are not recommending that that is extended due to there being a fenced play area within the fenced existing area. So there's an area that children can access already that should be sufficient for their needs in that area. Officers had always also introduced a new requirement to for people walking their dogs to have at all times a means to collect and dispose of dog feces. Despite support from the consultation, officers have looked closely at the Kennel Club recommendations and feel that at the current time it's more appropriate to undertake an educational campaign with the enforcement team and community engagement team to address the problem behaviour rather than putting a PSPO restriction in. Officers have also reviewed the exemptions and reworded it so that it is more encompassing rather than the current term that's used. The final recommendations that officers have looked at is the increasing the fixed penalty amount to the maximum level, which aligns with similar environmental offences such as fly tipping and littering that are set at the maximum amounts as well. And then officers have also inserted an offence to fail to provide your details to an officer when an offence has been committed. That's not currently contained within the PSPO, and legal guidance has said we need to make that a restriction so that it creates an offence. That would bring it in line with littering and fly tipping. That's a very brief summary of the paper. I'm more than happy to take any questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Wendy. I'm now going to open it up to questions. If anyone has a question, could you please raise your hand? Yep, Olaf?
Okay, thank you, Chair. Yeah, thank you very much, Wendy. I mean, that's very detailed, a very detailed and well-balanced report, of course. So we obviously have to find the right balance between the safety of our residents and the protection of our wildlife and biodiversity, as well as the well-being of dogs and their owners. So, and in general, I think this all makes sense to me. I do have 3 general questions, and then even though Hobson's Park has obviously been deferred now, or we have 3 more years to think about it, I do have a few comments and questions on that separately. Would I be allowed to do that, or maybe first 3 general questions, and then we can move on to that? My first question is, I think just to confirm that we're on the same page there, I think the number of reports of dog attacks or dangerous dogs, I mean, in the report itself and also in the Freedom of Information request, are quite low, and I would say they're too low to actually come to any meaningful conclusions there. We obviously don't want these numbers to go up, but I don't see any reasons to tighten any restrictions because of these numbers. And I just want to confirm that this is sort of what I also read from the report, that is sort of what we agree on there. The second question is on the maximum of 4 dogs restriction. And I actually think the Kennel Club had quite a reasonable suggestion there. So they say that the maximum number of controllable dogs depends on the type of dogs and the dog walker. Obviously, I mean, 4 poodles might be less dangerous than even 2 Great Danes. I don't know. I'm not a dog owner myself. And these restrictions may just displace the problem to elsewhere. And wouldn't it be more reasonable to have some accreditation scheme for dog walkers instead? So I was just wondering if you could elaborate on that a little bit more. And finally, I mean, are there really no implications with respect to enforcement? Because the number of restrictions is likely is going up, and also maybe in a few years' time, possibly also to Hobson's Park, but the number of enforcement officers is not. So how do we decide, or how do you decide, you know, what is enough when it comes to enforcement? Thank you.
Thank you, Olaf. Would the officer like to respond?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So just to clarify, where you've talked about dangerous dogs and complaints, I think it's it needs to be made very clear that when we talk about a complaint, we don't necessarily mean where someone has just made a written formal statement to the council. The intelligence that we use in order to put forward these recommendations can include verbal statements that are made to officers whilst they're undertaking their patrols, and that could be over a 3-year period. It could be requests for service. For example, if someone is reported dog fouling that needs clearing up, but it also could be communications that people send a text message or leave a voicemail for officers. That sort of information isn't necessarily recorded in a way that can be extracted from a complaint system. So when we're looking at the intelligence, we kind of we gather it from a variety of sources as well. So although the figures for dangerous dogs might not be written down in black and white, the recommendation was made based on a combination of that, plus also officer intelligence as well. But we're more than happy to focus over the next 3 years to look at whether Hobson's Park needs further restrictions on it. I think that's something we recognise needs some further work at this current time, which is why we've removed that proposal to have the dogs on leads area. In terms of the number of maximum number of dogs, we've gone with the same restriction that was at Byron's Pool. Byron's Pool 3 years ago had a big problem with professional dog walkers turning up, opening their vans and letting out a large number of dogs walk all over the place, not able to control them, not able to clear up after them, and not take care of them in a manner that was professional or responsible. When we introduced that measure at Byron's Pool, that problem ceased to exist. We saw no evidence of it being displaced anywhere else at all. Either those dog walkers that may have been coming in from outside Cambridge no longer come into the city, or they have found somewhere else where we have not had the same level of reports through to our team. So for us, there was no evidence to support not introducing this restriction at Hobson's Park. And I know you talk about dogs depending on the type and the breed. It also depends on the owner and the capability, because some dog owners will have better control over their dogs, more confidence. But we looked at both the DEFRA guidance and also the professional dog walkers guidance, and that latter document recommends 4 is a reasonable number that can be controlled. And most respondees from the consultation felt that even 4 was too many. So we've gone along the lines of what was reasonable at Byron's Pool, and feel that that's a reasonable number that should be carried over to Hobson's Park and Coldham's Common as well. In terms of the accreditation scheme, I'm not familiar with any schemes that are run by councils off the top of my head. It kind of sounds very much like a licensing type scheme, and I think you have to ask the question about how would that be administered if it was a voluntary scheme, how that would be set up, how it would be run, how it might be financed. I think at the current time, we wouldn't necessarily have the resource to look at that. We would always support sort of educational campaigns around that. So if that was something that a Friends of group felt was really positive for a park or open space, I think that's certainly something we could explore going forwards. In terms of the enforcement team and being able to take action against the offences, at the end of the day, I think it should be made very clear that the PSPO is put in place to deter irresponsible behaviour. We respond based on intelligence, so we are not aiming to be at all these sites all the time. For example, obviously the seasonal dogs on leads order will require enforcement for 4 months of the year. The other 8 months of the year, there won't be a need to have such a presence at these sites. And we would say that sort of taking enforcement action is kind of a single measure of sort of what you need to do. There's a variety of other enforcement options we have available to us to deal with the irresponsible behaviour, but they are aimed at individual people. And as we said in the beginning, the PSPO is designed to tackle irresponsible behaviour, which is a small minority of people. So the enforcement team are 6 people across the whole city. They are separated into 3 teams of 2, operating in geographical wards. But they are able to take action based on intelligence. So it's pivotal for us that the public and members and businesses and organisations and groups feedback to us where there's a problem so that we can target that. A recent example we've had this week is we've had a lot of intelligence around Terry Hinton Hall, and there being some problems with dog owners being in the On Leeds area, our officers have been able to respond several times this week and have actually caught a number of people and have issued fixed penalties for those offences, and that's based on intelligence. So I think, yes, we do have a suitable number of officers that can respond. A PSPO doesn't have constant officers patrolling, and we very much require the input from members and from the public really to ensure it's a success. I hope that answers those questions.
Thank you, Wendy. I will invite others to ask questions now. Dinah?
Yes, I just want to say how welcome these measures are. And we've had some nasty incidents in Romsey quite recently. So hopefully this will help. I'm interested in the signage and also whether you've got any plans to have signage along streets, because we've also have noticed an increase in dog fouling on pavements. Residents have raised this. So, I mean, when I was little, there were always signs on every lamppost saying, you know, penalty, whatever, for letting your dog foul the pavement. And also whether the reporting tool could be on these notices, both in the parks and open spaces and perhaps on the streets as well, so that people can report quickly and efficiently.
Would the executive or one of the officers like to comment? Yeah, Wendy, could you comment?
Yes, of course. So thank you for supporting the measures. I do think that they are important to ensure that there is a clear standard for which the behaviour of dog owners and dog walkers is clear. In terms of the signage, a lot of our signage is quite old now and has a lot of words on it. And obviously, when it was set up in 2017, QR codes weren't as common as they are now. So we are certainly looking to redesign the signage so that it's more relevant to officers and quite clear to members of the public how they can report issues if they're not happy, rather than just an email address and a phone number. We can now direct people direct to the web forms to report issues, and we can give them a QR code to make it quick and simple for them to action. So that's something we would look to put in place for the PSPO should it be extended October time. In terms of signage on streets, with dog fouling, because it's a city-wide offence, we can't put them on every single lamppost. We do aim to put them at the hotspot areas or regular points where we know there are problems. And likewise, if we get intelligence, officers can request signage, and members and the public can request signage, and we'll certainly review every location and put them up as applicable. So more than happy to take any suggestions for locations that people feel are appropriate, and we'll get the signage out there. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any further questions? Yes, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, I'd like to thank you as well for the report. I think it's very comprehensive, good level of consultation, and very interesting to see the responses from people on this, because I think there is a high level of acceptance of the need to actually introduce these measures. I particularly support introducing the dogs on lead in nature reserves, because I think this has caused major problems, and I do think that the report actually did reveal that quite a lot of people really don't understand the danger to nesting birds, for example, and why it is important in those months that dogs are kept on leads in nature reserves. So I'm just wondering, thinking again about the signage issue, how can we better inform people so that they understand the reasons for this, that it's not just some kind of arbitrary dictate coming down. There is a good reason for it. Also, I mean, I agree, I don't really want to see a lot of extra signage in these areas, but something to sort of make it clearer to people as well. For example, why it is important that they should clean up after their dogs, especially in nature reserves. Because I don't know if you've seen, there was a study last year that showed that levels of nitrogen and phosphorus pollution in nature reserves were higher than they would have levels that would be illegal in farmland, and that this actually, plant life has said that this has the greatest impact in biodiversity of anything. So obviously the phosphorus comes, you know, you can poop scoop that, but obviously the urine is the cause of the nitrogen. And I don't know how we can stop people, you know, letting their dogs pee in nature reserves. But I do think that if people actually understood why these things are important, it might help. And the other thing is, could I just put a plea in to have some green bins in these places, in our green spaces, rather than the red bins? This is something that's a particular little group of residents keep asking me about on Namasland and Sheep's Green. I'm just wondering whether, rather than having a lot of additional signs, some of this information could be actually on those bins. And obviously with QR codes, that might help as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Would the executive like to respond?
Yeah, I just had a very brief comment. I think Wendy might want to come in with a bit more detail, but I just wanted to say that actually I think a lot of the issues you've just raised, you're absolutely hitting the nail on the head, of course, there, Councillor Glasberg. And a lot of these things are things that I've been picking up with Wendy and that we've been discussing, especially around the signage, about the seasonal variations. So one of the fears that I had initially was that you might have compliance problems when people think, well, hang on, why can I walk my dog in there? Why does my dog have to be on a lead this month and not next month? And so, yeah, that's absolutely something that we need to be on. And I think what we will do with the signage, and, not just signage, as you say, putting it on bins is certainly an interesting idea. Perhaps there's others being to look at that, but we will. And we'll do something to make sure that people actually understand the reasons for those restrictions. And yeah, absolutely, we can just make sure, because that improves compliance, and of course, as you say, it's much better for the reserves that way. We may have to try and do it creatively so that we don't use too many words, because people don't read words, of course. But something will be done. I think Wendy may want to add something to that.
Thank you. Wendy, would you like to respond as well?
Yeah, just to add from what Councillor Carling's already said, we also found that what was useful at some of the sites was to add maps on as well, to make it exactly clear where the boundaries are, and to almost put a sign up that says you are now leaving a seasonal dogs on leads area, so people kind of know when they're entering and exiting areas. So we'll be looking at what other authorities have learned from their signage. Obviously, very similar ones are the sort of dogs on beaches signs, so that will be quite interesting to learn what they have used, what works and what didn't work. Most of the nature reserves all have friends of groups, or they have large numbers of volunteers that work on them. So in conjunction with those groups, we'd like to develop the signage as well, but also with our biodiversity officer, who can provide the explanation that will go on the signage to make it clear why we're doing that. And like you say, it's not just a restriction for the sake of it, there is actual reasoning behind it. In terms of the dog bins, we don't currently install any new dog bins at the moment, because dog waste no longer needs to be treated separately. It can actually go in general waste bins. So we have signage that goes on the general bins to alert people to the fact that as long as it's bagged up, dog waste can go in a normal litter bin. So I don't see why an opportunity might not be there to look at whether at key areas where there is dog walking, whether we could develop some signage to go on the general litter bins to make it clear that they could use those for dog waste, especially if the bins already sort of complement the open space landscape and don't kind of cause any issues. So I hope that answers that question as well.
Okay, are there any further questions? Yes, Ola?
Yeah, so I still have a couple of points on Hobson's Park, if I may. Wendy and I have already been in some email contact about that, but I just want to highlight, it's a fantastic space, obviously, for people, dogs, and wildlife. And unfortunately, they may come into conflict there in some cases. And I completely also, following on from Councillor Glasberg's comments, I just fully acknowledge that we made a strong commitment to protect and enhance biodiversity. Obviously, our biodiversity officers recommend strongly to restrict dogs during bird nesting seasons, and the Wildlife Trust clearly says that allowing dogs to run wild in nature reserves can be devastating for wildlife. And in fact, it is law on open access land to keep dogs on leads shorter than 2 meters. Actually, it's also important to realize that dogs on long leads can still cause havoc in some wildlife areas, because the leads themselves can actually disturb birds. And therefore, with Hobson's Park, where I've talked to quite a number of residents who don't necessarily understand that it's required, these restrictions for all of Hobson's Park, and obviously they love close to that dense residential area. They would like to keep the dogs running around freely. They think it's important for the dogs to exercise freely. I just wonder, within the next 3 years, we can, first of all, think about, while these restrictions are not in place, how we can protect wildlife over the next 3 years. And I think suggesting about signage, I think it's key, important. Information, education. And also over the next 3 years, if we can arrange a meeting of councillors officers, possibly members of other organizations who could contribute to actually look at the space and see if it is possible to separate some areas, just like in Trumpeton Meadows Nature Reserve, where some area is for dogs and another area, other areas for wildlife. It may not work out, I don't know. And yeah, and maybe also gather some data about these ground nesting birds. I don't understand enough necessarily about this, where they are, how many they are, and how much the proposed restrictions would actually do to help to protect these particular birds there. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Would the executive like to comment, or should I ask Wendy? Okay. Wendy, could you please comment or respond to that question?
Yes, of course. I certainly think that it would be wise over the next 3 years to look at Hobson's Park in its entirety. Obviously, 3 years is quite a long period of time to consider what will be appropriate. And during that time, obviously, we hope to have the maximum number of dogs on leads restriction in place, which would prevent any sort of professional dog walkers bringing large numbers in and sort of potentially taking over space that should be used for the local residents. And so, yes, I certainly support needing a meeting to look at the site and review how best to support not only the wildlife, but also the residents as well.
Thank you. Are there any further questions? Yes, Councillor.
Is it okay if I ask one more question? I just want to comment on the point about the sports pitches as well, because I think this is also an important point about dogs on leads on sports pitches. I mean, I know that the Kennel Club and other objectors have said that they think dogs should be allowed to run freely on sports pitches, but actually fouling there is also a health hazard for the people who are playing sports there. And I think that the data, I mean, they did say that actually fouling is more of a problem if the dogs are not on leads. So I do think that there is a case for officers to be monitoring this situation and looking at if this is something that we should say that dogs should be on leads on sports pitches that are heavily used. Because again, just doing the point about it's okay for dogs to be running freely there if there are not games being played is still ignoring the point that if they are running freely there and fouling there, that is a problem for the people who are then playing the games there. And it is actually a serious health hazard.
Thank you. Would the executive, Wendy, would you like to comment?
Yes, thank you. I certainly think, as with Hobson's Park, it's an area to monitor over the next 3 years. I think the reason we didn't recommend introducing it at the current time is because in order to find out if there might be a game being played or whether there's a game due to be played or whether the pitch is booked out, it's not very easy for a member of the public at the moment, and to expect a member of the public to undertake that action wouldn't be reasonable at the current time. So I certainly think there's some work for us to do with the recreations side of things to see if that could be communicated more easily, so it was quite obvious when the pitches are being used, or whether we look at a seasonal restriction to say the pitches are used between X month and X month. It's all work we need to look at over the next 3 years to see what restrictions might be appropriate rather than a sort of a blanket restriction, so that again it balances the needs of the dogs and their owners and also the people using the parks as well.
Thank you. So unless the executive, Councillor Carling, would like to add any further comment, I think we're ready to go to the vote as amended and excluding Hobson's Park. Yep. So we'll go to the substantive vote, and as before, please could you raise your hand if you're in favour of the agenda item?
Yeah, that looks unanimous in favour of the recommendation.
Was that agenda item? We'll turn to the executive. Sorry about that.
Thank you. Yeah, not at all. Of course, more than happy to accept the recommendations and just say, yeah, thank you, Wendy, for working on that. It would be good to see sort of how things progress in the next few years. Hopefully we can make some real progress and address some of the issues that we're seeing. So thank you very much, everyone.
Okay, thank you. We'll now move to the next agenda item, which is agenda item number 7. Okay, and this is the PSPO on touting, the 2016. Please could Karen Jelly, who's the presenting officer, introduce the agenda item?
Thank you, Chair. So the Antisocial Behaviour Crime and Policing Act gives local authorities the powers to make public space protection orders. This PSPO prohibits touting for punts or other tours that involve a punt in the areas covered in Appendix A of the report. And a breach of a PSPO is a criminal offence, and those who are in breach can receive a fixed penalty notice instead of going down the criminal route. The details of the PSPO are covered in Section 3 of the report. Key points to highlight are that this PSPO is currently due to end on the 14th of September this year, and before that date the Council needs to decide whether to renew, vary or extend the order. And our public consultation showed overarching support for the order, with 81% of respondents supporting an extension, and of those who supported the extension, 83% were residents, 34% worked in the city, and the majority of the business community also supported the extension, including 4 punt operators. So the Executive Councillor is recommended to extend the PSPO for a period of 3 years. To support updated signage to make clearer how people can report punt touting in the prohibited areas, and also to increase the fixed penalty notices issued for breaches so that they're in line with all other fixed penalty notices issued by Cambridge City Council as outlined in sections 3.17 and 3.25.
Okay, thank you, Karen. I'll now open the debate. Anyone would like to ask a question? Yep, Dinah?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I wondered if you could just talk a bit more about the updated signage that will be put up and what will be put on it and where will it be displayed. Thank you.
Would the executive like to comment? Yep.
Yeah, I'm happy to come in here. I don't know if Karen wants to add a bit afterwards if I've missed anything. But I think we can see from the report that a lot of people have noticed or witnessed touting but not reported it. So I think in conversation with the officers, the aim is to increase the signage so that people have more information about touting and how they can report it to the council, and not just about touting but other forms of antisocial behaviour that they can report to the council as well. So yeah, we're going to review where the signage is based on the consultation findings of where the PSPO, where people said that they saw touting that shouldn't have been happening in those PSPO areas. And that's everything.
Thank you. Karen, would you like to comment further?
Just to say that we'll be updating the signage to make it more visual, as Wendy mentioned when she was talking about the signage for the dog control. Our original signage was much more wordy, and so we want to update it to make it more visual, again using QR codes and such to kind of help people to make reporting easier.
Yep. Councillor Hogg?
Thank you. I mean, just to support that point, I think many of us regularly get annoyed when we experience this kind of touting in different places, but then we quickly forget about it, even if we may think, oh, we should probably complain, but then it probably leaves our minds quite quickly. So if there was a number there and then that we could quickly call to say, hey, these guys are getting on our nerves right now, I think that would help. So if there is some way of making this really easy for people, then I think that would be great. I mean, another question I have is there are there any restrictions around the station square as well? I mean, because it's one thing to have stalls there where people advertise what they have to offer to tourists. It's another thing to immediately welcome people who come out of the station and say, here, you know, people probably not even familiar with Cambridge or what's you know, where they can get these tickets or whatever they're offering, and basically run into their arms and immediately impose this on them. So I was just wondering if there's any plan to have any restrictions for that area as well. Thank you.
Yeah, the executive.
Thanks, Olaf. As far as I'm aware, this year there was no evidence to vary the PSPO to include the station area. So that's why this year it's not going to be included. But in future, if lots of residents aren't happy with that going forwards, I don't know what, I mean, Karen might want to respond on the legalities, because I think that area is not owned by the council, so it might have to go through other kind of formalities with the owners of the station area. But currently that's not proposed for this extension.
Karen, would you like to add comment about the station?
Yeah. So our council officers are aware of the touting that's happening at the station. The practice of those operators are covered so long as they are part of a recognised establishment, which those operating at the station are. As Councillor Gilderdale mentioned, they do have consent of the landowner, which is Network Rail. So if we were to be considering changes to the order and future, we would also have to get the consent of Network Rail to agree to that being a prohibited area. So we'd have to have consultation with them for them to approve that. But their practices is covered under the voluntary code of practice that we have.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? No? Okay, I think we can go to the vote unless the executive has any further comments to add.
No, all good, thank you.
Okay, let's go to the substantive vote then. Could you please raise your hand if you're voting in favour of the recommendation?
Yep, everyone's in favour of the recommendation, Chair.
And go to the executive.
Thank you. I'm very happy to accept the recommendations, and thank you to Karen and the team for their work on this.
Okay, that's carried, and we'll move to the next agenda item. I think we would just have a 10-minute comfort break right now, so we will return at 10 to 8. Okay, thank you. Continue the session. Are we all set up online? Okay, perfect. Right, so we now move on to agenda item number 8, which is the Single Equality Scheme Annual Report 2022-2023. And the presenting officer is Helen Corther, Equality and Anti-Poverty Officer. Could you please introduce the agenda item? Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Chair. So the current single equality scheme covers the period from 2021 to 2024. The Council produced a scheme to set equality objectives and therefore ensure transparency and assist in the performance of its public sector equality duty. So an annual report is undertaken for the scheme each year, and this is the annual report for the second year of the current scheme. The Executive Council is recommended to note the progress in delivering equalities actions during 2022-23 and approve the new actions proposed for delivery during 2023-2024 financial years. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. I will now open the item up for debate. Does anyone have any questions? No? Okay, would the executive like to make any comments?
This is one of my favourite items of the year. I think we have achieved a huge amount across all our different areas of work, all our teams, all our departments. Obviously, the equalities work runs through everything. I think we've some really exciting and vital pieces of work coming up this year. One of them is our commitment to developing a children and youth strategy for the city, and one of our Labour manifesto commitments. So that's really exciting. We're also going to be developing an anti-racism action plan for the council, and we're also going to be working more out in the community. So, for example, with our community picnics, where we'll be delivering wraparound services as well. So I think there's lots and lots of really exciting things coming up in conjunction with our community wealth building approach as well, which obviously Councillor Gilderdale leads on. So yeah, really happy about this, and thanks to the officers for all the work. Thanks very much.
I know David Kidston is online. He's the Strategy and Partnerships Manager. I don't know if he wants to make any comments or anything on this agenda item.
No, thank you, Chair. Other than to say that it reflects the wide range of work that's going on across council services, not just in the service that Helen and I work within, and I think that's reflected in all the achievements over the past year, but also in the new actions that Helen's identified in the report. But yeah, if there's no questions from the committee, I'll leave it there.
Thank you, David. And if there are no further questions, I think we'll take it to the substantive vote. Could those in favour please raise your hand?
That's all in favour of the recommendation, Chair.
Thank you, and I'll turn to the executive to see whether you support the agenda item.
Yes, I do. Thanks.
Okay, that's carried. Thank you. And now we move to the agenda item number 9, which is the Anti-Poverty Strategy Annual Report of 2022 and 2023. And we've got David Kidston again, who's actually presenting this time. Please, could you introduce the agenda item?
Thank you, Chair. So this report provides an update on the Council's anti-poverty work during 2022-23, as the title suggests, and it's reporting on the work as part of our current anti-poverty strategy, which runs until March 2024. So the report highlights some planned activities to address the root causes of poverty and the impacts of poverty on residents and communities. But we've also highlighted a range of activities that were delivered in response to the rising cost of living in the past 12 months, both by council services, but also in partnership with voluntary and community groups locally and other statutory partners in the city. So I've highlighted some of the key actions in the covering committee report at section 4, but Appendix A provides a more comprehensive overview of the activities delivered over the past year. So I'm happy to take any questions that members of the committee may have on the report.
Thank you. Are there any questions on this item? Yes, Councillor Pound?
Thank you, Chair. My question is about Warm Spaces scheme. I just wanted to say that it's been really successful and well used by our residents in Romsey. It's a great support in combating loneliness and isolation, as well as providing a warm, comfortable place for people who are struggling to heat their own homes. We've also found it a really useful vehicle as a vehicle for community activities and the arts. In Romsey we have a music project and we have free lunchtime concerts for residents to enjoy in a place that they can access easily and feel comfortable in. And the last concert of this term was actually attended by nearly 50 people. So they enjoyed their concert. They also have refreshments and a chance to chat to the musicians, something which they really enjoyed. In a place where they feel comfortable in their own community. So it's a really, really welcome scheme. So my question is, are there plans to continue it next year and keep this support going over the coming winter?
Thank you. Would the executive like to comment?
Yeah, I can comment, and if David wants to come in afterwards, that's fine as well. So yeah, it's been a really popular scheme. So we funded 43 of these warm spaces right across the city. We also had, national grants which enabled us to provide those spaces. So what we're doing going forward is we're already sort of thinking about this winter, and we're going to be working with the community and voluntary sector to decide what support that looks like. Some of them have already sort of developed into things like breakfast clubs or community living rooms. So we're going to be working with all the individual groups and communities across the city to decide what the offer will be. But yeah, very much in partnership with the sector. So if David wants to come in, if you have anything further.
David, would you like to comment?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you.
I think we might still have him. Okay, are there any further questions? We can always come back to him when he joins us again. Yes, Councillor Swift.
Hello, thank you, Chair. Yeah, we've got a community drop-in in West Chesterton that has started up recently. It's followed on what used to be called the Warm Room, and we've renamed it Community Drop-in. But it has the same function to what Councillor Pounds was talking about, playing dominoes, talking about anything that residents want to talk about. We pick up difficulties that people are having, and we can gently give them information, and it's a very good community asset. And that's not even part of the official scheme. So I think there's lots of these community drop-ins that have started up since coronavirus that have been very, very beneficial for local residents. I'd like to talk about something slightly different, and this is another question for Executive Councillor Mairead Healy. As everyone present in this chamber is aware, food security is a growing issue as the cost of living crisis affects more and more residents across our city. In my ward, West Chesterton, we now have 3 food collection points up and running. They are at Milton Road Library, the new Chesterton Institute, and most recently, Milton Road Primary School, all of which are linked in with Cambridge Sustainable Food, which is the main provider, the umbrella organisation for food hubs as opposed to food banks, providing medium to long-term food for those that need it. The new Milton Road Primary School food collection point has resulted in a record number of pupil donations of food and toiletries, and has been incorporated as part of their Eco-Citizens project, which is a project that is actually at more than one school within our city. I'd like to expand this initiative to other primary schools around North Cambridge and possibly beyond. in order to help plug the gap in dwindling supermarket donations for our food hubs, which provide long-term food security for hundreds of families across our city each week. Something that is becoming increasingly apparent for Cambridge Sustainable Food is that the supermarkets, the amount of produce that is donated from supermarkets is becoming very variable, and it's very difficult to predict how much is going to arrive on any one day. Usually it's bread and donuts, and there's no protein and more nutritious types of food. So the new initiative that we started in West Chesterton limits donations to just a few non-perishable goods, so cans of baked beans and tuna and meat and soup, for example, rice and pasta and toiletries. And the question is for Executive Councillor Mairead Healy, well, sort of request. I'd like to raise the subject of small community grants for this initiative. The money would be used to pay for volunteers' expenses such as petrol, as well as publicity and the possibility of hiring public venues for speakers. So I'd just like to ask Executive Councillor Healy about her thoughts on that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Would you like to respond?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, thanks very much, Councillor Swift. And I think, you know, what you've raised is something, you know, which has been really fantastic to see across the city during the cost of living crisis, and that's the amount of volunteers that have stepped up across the city to fill the gaps where this national government has failed to provide a safety net for our most vulnerable residents. You know, and I think projects like yours is really helping those who are really struggling. And I think it's a project that's doing a lot of good. And so just to sort of reiterate around in terms of our community grants program, so we do have kind of a main grants program, but we also have a smaller grants program, which we kind of changed some of the aspects of the paperwork required for that, so it's kind of less bureaucracy involved. So I'd really encourage you to apply for one of those small grants when the grant round opens in the autumn, I think, because that's exactly the sort of project that we would fund under that. So thanks very much for raising it.
Thanks very much.
Okay. David, I know you're back with us now. Thank you for returning. Would you like to finish what you were talking about?
Thank you, Chair. And firstly, apologies. I lost my internet connection briefly there, so I've missed some of the debate. I think I was just going to add in response to the previous question in relation to welcoming and warm spaces, that certainly the experience has been, as councillors have said, that people aren't necessarily all coming to those sessions because due to energy and heating issues, that actually they're coming for a sense of community and to sort of combat social isolation. So the various sort of community activities put on by the community centres themselves and also partner organisations have been what people have been looking for, what has made that project a success. That was all I wanted to say, but I think Councillor Healy probably covered that in her response.
Okay, thank you. Are there any further questions? Thank you, Councillor Wade.
Thank you, yes. Thanks, Chair. It's just an acknowledgement, really, and I would invite Executive Councillor Healy to join with me in thanking the staff at the community centres that Cambridge City Council have. The amount that they've contributed to the anti-poverty strategy is amazing. If you go through all the actual report of the things that they do in providing warm spaces, meals, community cohesion, exercise groups, and somewhere where they're seen and can feel safe to combat loneliness as well. So they help tremendously to address poverty and to mitigate the effects of poverty and strengthen their community and with families living in that community. And I think they're so good at doing their jobs, we quite often overlook that they're there. And I think we should bang the drum more frequently about how much they contribute to this whole scheme. So I'd like to invite Councillor Healy to just join with me in thanking the staff that run the centres and work so closely with their communities. Thank Thank you.
Councillor Healy, would you like to make any further comments?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Endorse what Councillor Wade has said. These community centres are, you know, lifelines for some of our most vulnerable residents, and it's the staff and the volunteers, you know, that really provide that welcome atmosphere, provide that sense of belonging, and you know, making it such open and welcoming spaces for our residents. So, you know, 100% agree with Councillor Wade. And it's actually fantastic as well the past year to see some of the new community centres as well being added. You know, the Meadows and the Mill Road the Mill Road Community Centre as well. I think it's fantastic to have all these spaces across the city for our residents.
Yes, Councillor Swift.
Yes, I just want to sort of say that make a sort of thank you for the libraries. Cambridge Central Library has been fantastic in working across with the, I know it's County Council, but with the City Council and with the communities, and they've been incredibly supportive for all of our initiatives, for community drop-ins, for food collection points, and in many other ways. And I just think that should be recognised. Thank you.
Thank you. So unless there are any further questions, I think we can move to the substantive recommendation vote. For those in favour, could you please raise your hand?
That's unanimous in favour of the recommendation.
Thank you. And now I'll go to the executive to support it.
Yeah, I just want to really pay tribute to our officers, because, you know, alongside the work that we already do, you know, the kind of ongoing work addressing poverty, you know, our community grants programme, all the initiatives that we do, there's just been a huge response that we've provided to the cost of living crisis in the past year. And it's been exemplar in terms of, like, if you look at all our authorities, things like the cost of living pop-ups, the warm spaces, there's been a huge amount, you know, even things like giving out blankets and, you know, air fryers, and hot water bottles. You know, there's really been a massive effort by our council to really support those who are struggling the most. So I just really wanted to pay tribute to our officers. And secondly, as others have said, really to the community and voluntary sector who have just stepped up, this army of volunteers and our local charities. They've really supported residents when this government has failed to provide the support that they need. So just, you know, thanks so much to them as well. And that's all I wanted to say. Thanks.
Okay, so I think I can draw this session to a close. I'd just like to thank everybody for their contributions today, public speakers, the officers and members here today. And this concludes this committee session. Thank you.